Welcome. I'm Maura Grossman. I'm a professor in the School of Computer Science at the University of Waterloo and a adjunct professor of law at Osgoode Hall Law School, both in Ontario. And I am joined with Professor Hany Farid of the School of Information at Berkeley and Judge Paul Grimm, who's a professor of the practice and director of the Bolsh Judicial Institute at Duke Law. And we are here on behalf of both the ABA Task Force on Law, and in particular, I think it's AI in the Courts subcommittee, as well as the Bolsh Judicial Institute. And we're going to talk about deepfakes and the impact of deepfakes on the justice system. And we're going to separate this into 3 parts, and if we're lucky, 4. So I'm going to go first, and I'm going to talk about, if I get my slides to move, first I'm going to talk about how we got from AI to generative AI to deepfakes. And then I'm going to talk about how deepfakes work, and I'll do some demos. Then I'm going to turn it over to Professor Farid, who's going to talk about whether we can detect deepfakes or not, and what is the challenge of that. And finally, we'll turn it over to Judge Grimm, and he is going to talk about the evidentiary considerations that judges and parties should be thinking about. So let's begin. So I'm not going to explain to everybody what AI is, but we all know that AI is a term that was coined in the mid-50s, and it means computers doing intelligent things, performing cognitive tasks that we once thought only humans could do. And once we get used to it, we simply call it software. It's only AI until we sort of get bored with it and used to it, but otherwise it's simply software. And generally, we're talking about algorithms, machine learning, and natural language processing. And by algorithms, I simply mean a set of instructions to complete a task. So a recipe is, in fact, a recipe to bake a cake is an algorithm. The only difference with a computer algorithm is it's a set of instructions that we give to a computer to have it do something. And when we talk about machine learning, we're talking about a change in computing from systems where we had to tell the computer every single step it needed to take. So do this, then do this. If there's an exception, do this. If there's not an exception, do that. And with a lot of if-then statements. And when we moved into machine learning, that was no longer necessary because the computer system can infer those rules from the data by itself. So unsupervised machine learning would be a system that's going to take a set of data and it's going to look for naturally occurring patterns, clusters, groupings, or anomalies. So it would take my gray people and divide them up into green, blue, red, and purple people. And it would do that essentially on its own. If we were talking about supervised machine learning, that requires the training of a human. So if I want to teach an algorithm to distinguish between pictures of puppies and pictures of kitties, I've got to give it labeled examples. This is a puppy, this is a kitty, this is a puppy, this is a kitty. So I don't have to sit down and write out all the rules like puppy's ears flop down, but if it's a Russell Terrier, the ears go up first and then they flop down, and kitties have smaller ears. I don't have to write all of that down. I can simply give the algorithm these example pictures that are labeled, and then it can take unlabeled pictures and it can decide whether their features are more like those of a puppy or a kitty. If we have a more dynamic problem where we don't have as much of that trained data, we can use reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning combines exploration and exploitation. Exploration would be going into the new data, and exploitation would be going back to the old data and maybe going deeper in it. So it's sort of like breadth versus depth. And the system would learn based on reinforcement provided by a human. So when we move forward and we get to, for example, ChatGPT, there were a lot of people behind the scenes, mostly in the global South, who were saying good answer or bad answer, toxic answer or toxic picture, okay picture. And we don't often talk about that, but that is one way that systems can learn, through reinforcement learning, through human feedback. Deep learning is more complex than simple machine learning, although it's a form of machine learning. So think of deep learning as a stack of pancakes, and each pancake is a little brain. And each of those little brains, or neural networks, as we sometimes call them, do a different task, or analyzing different features or different aspects of the problem. So if we want, for example, to guess what's in that picture, we might have the one algorithm at the first level looking at the pixels in the foreground, another algorithm looking at the pixels in the background. The third algorithm might look at the color. The fourth algorithm might look at the shadows. And all of this information, as you can see in the little demo on the upper right, gets integrated together, and normally a prediction is made. So here it's boat 94%. If it were an autonomous vehicle, it might be LiDAR plus radar plus GPS plus weather conditions plus road conditions, prediction in the next 5 seconds, turn the car right. So this allows us to do very, very sophisticated things, but it creates a bit of a black box problem because we don't actually know what is going on at each of these levels. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So all of the things I've talked to up to this point are basically statistics and probabilities. When we get to natural language processing, if you will, we're trying to get a computer to understand language, but it doesn't understand language in the way you or I would. It's trying to build a computer representation of that language, including its syntax and semantics. So it might break longer units like paragraph into sentences, or sentences into words. It's looking for the boundaries. It's trying to look for co-occurrences of words that might give meaning. So strike, slap, and smack might have one meaning. Strike, labor, and union might have another meaning, and strike, baseball, and umpire might have a third meaning. And those other words in context help the algorithm figure out what the content is. It looks at where in the document, for example, words in a title are likely to be more important than words in a footnote, and so forth. So AI can be any and all of these things combined together. It doesn't have to be just one of them. So how do we get to Gen AI? Well, Gen AI, or generative AI, is a subset of AI that uses training on massive sources like the internet to generate new content in response to a user's prompt. And it's very good at conversing, replicating styles, creative tasks, synthesizing or summarizing content. And Gen AI falls under the broad category of machine learning and natural language processing. It uses both. So it leverages those neural networks, that deep learning, to analyze underlying patterns and structures of data, enabling it to predict, for example, with ChatGPT, what word should come next. But because it generates fresh and unique content, that's why it hallucinates. And while in the law, most of us consider that a bug, in some contexts, that's considered a feature. So how did we get where we are today? Well, there were a couple of big developments in 2014 and 2017. And the first one in 2014 that's very important to understand is the introduction of generative adversarial networks, or GANs. And they allowed us to take a huge leap forward in creating authentic looking content, which is very, very important when it comes to deepfakes, because if they don't look authentic, we don't have to worry about them. The dilemma is that they do look authentic. So GANs revolutionized image, audio, and video generation. And how did they do that? Well, there are two algorithms that are working together: the generative network and the discriminative network. The generative network produces or creates content, and the discriminative network distinguishes it and compares it to reality and provides feedback to the other algorithms. So if we're creating a picture of Judge Grimm and it appears with a mustache, the discriminative algorithm is going to say, no, he doesn't have a mustache. That's not right. And so they're going to work together in some way, and that is how we get the better and better content. But it also explains why detection is so difficult, because the better the discriminative network is, the better the generative network is. And as one gets better, the other gets better. The other breakthrough in 2017 was something called transformer architecture, which allowed us to process natural language. We didn't need as much of this pre-labeled, this is a noun, this is a verb, that kind of stuff, but beforehand. And it also allowed us to process, use many, many computers together at the same time in parallel to process, for example, the internet to train a ChatGPT. And another major change with GPT-3 was this use of reinforcement learning that I mentioned, giving human feedback to modify and improve the output of the model. So just to give you an example of text to speech, I input into this fake you algorithm. I asked President Obama to say hello to you, and let's see how good that sounds.
Folks. Really glad you joined this webinar today. This is important stuff, and your speakers are really knowledgeable, so listen to every word they say.
I think that's a pretty good Obama for free in about 2 seconds right on the open internet, and we'll talk more about that. So what are deepfakes? Well, deepfakes are basically AI's answer to photoshopping. They're fake AI-generated videos. And they first appeared in 2017 when a Reddit user named, in fact, Deepfake, started to post porn clips, but he'd mapped the faces of movie stars on these porn clips. And initially, they weren't so good. So he asked everybody all over the internet, help me with this. I need to make them better. And everybody stepped in and helped with this project. So the first stop on this little journey was revenge porn. Other people started putting other people's heads on porn. Then we saw spoof, satire, and other mischief, like putting words into politicians' mouths when we saw the Obama video that went viral. And finally, in about 2019, it landed in fraud and crime. So in 2019, you had the head of a UK subsidiary of a German firm paid 200,000 sterling to a Hungarian bank account after being phoned by a fraudster that he thought was the German CEO telling him to do that. And now we see very sophisticated deep fakes that are used really to defraud people. So the term has been expanded to include fictional photos, fake social media accounts, fake reviews, voice clones, and fake evidence. When we talk about shallow fakes, we're talking about, for example, the video of Nancy Pelosi that was slowed down to make it sound like either she was drunk or had had a stroke. So that was a real video, but it was altered in some way. Generally, when we're talking about deep fakes, we're talking about fake stuff that didn't exist and didn't happen. So how do we make deep fakes? It's similar to GAN in some ways. It also uses two algorithms, an encoder and a decoder. And we're using deep learning models that, again, have multiple layers of recurrent networks. And each layer is representing a mathematical abstraction of the prior layer. And that's referred to as a latent representation. So the encoder extracts the latent features of the facial images, its emotional expression, its eye movements, its head position. And the decoder reconstructs the facial image from the latent features that it received from the encoder. So the decoder's job is to redraw that original image from the latent version. And these are generally trained or train themselves, and they improve exponentially by practicing on thousands of pairs. This is the source, this is the target I want to make. And essentially, to create the deepfake image, the decoder for the target image redraws the target image using the source's latent features. So essentially, it's rebuilding person B, the target's image, using person A's source emotional expression, eye movements, head position, etc. So I want to show a quick video showing you how this works.
The demos in this video are based on the paper Thin Plate Spline Motion Model for Image Animation, and a link to the paper will be provided in the description. Using this tool, it's possible to create deepfakes. The material we're about to show you is for educational purposes only. To get started with animating an image using this tool, you'll need two input sources, an image that you want to animate, and a video that will be used to animate your image. The video you provide is called the driving video. Once you have your input sources ready, head over to the website by clicking the link in the description. On the site, you'll see two sections where you can provide your input sources, one for the input source image and one for the driving video. You can use the provided example image of Donald Trump or upload your own image by clicking Drop a File or click to select. For this tutorial, we'll focus only on the first model, which is based on celebrities talking in front of the camera. Once you've selected the first model, you can start the process of animating your image. The tool will use the model to create a video of your image that mimics the movements and expressions of the person in the driving video. The outcome will be a set of images that have been animated based on the style of the driving video. Click on the video and download. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll catch you in the next one.
So let's see how easy this is. So here's a picture of Judge Grimm that I took off the internet. It's a lovely photo, as we can see. And I wanted to see if I could make a deep fake of Judge Grimm. So I tried twice. Let's see what you think. So here's the first one. I didn't have his voice. We tried. But he couldn't get me his voice. But there. And I thought, it's okay. It's not great. So let me try again with another one. These are all free tools right on the internet. And here's another one, which is scary good. So in 2013, I met Justice Sotomayor at a conference, and I took a picture of her, and she was holding a glass of wine. And the Secret Service came up to me afterwards and said, can you please delete that picture? The judge would be happy to take a picture of just the two of you, but she's really sensitive to having pictures of herself holding alcohol. Well, guess what, Justice Sotomayor? It would not be hard for me to take this picture and put the booze back in your hand. So we weren't thinking about that in 2013. So one more demo. I wanted to see if I wanted to use Judge Grimm's voice, but as I said, I couldn't get it. He was flying yesterday. So I took an input recording of my own voice, and I'm going to play you the input, and then I'm going to play you the output. And I asked it to make me angry. So here's the input, and the input is I'm just reading a script into the free system, which was Speechify. Here it goes. Speechify voice cloning allows you to create a clone of your voice. Use Speechify voice cloning for YouTube videos, audiobooks, corporate training, e-learning, podcasts, commercials, voicemail, and anything else you need. It's perfect to help you. So you get the idea. I read a script for about a minute. Now listen to this and see if you can tell the difference. I said my instructions was that it should make me angry. I wish Paul Grimm would stop asking me to do all these damn webinars with him. I can't stand it anymore, and I can hardly say no to him because he is a powerful former federal judge. So what exactly am I supposed to do under the circumstances? And who is this Hany Farid guy? Under what rock did they find him? Geez. Scary, scary, scary stuff. I wish Paul Grimm would stop. So let me wrap up and hand it over to Hany. We're in scary times because we know from research that these audios and videos have an outsized impact on the trier of fact. If you see and hear testimony that's video and audio, you are 650% more likely to retain that than, for example, if you're looking at a transcript. And even when jurors are aware that the audiovisual evidence could be fake, studies have shown they still tend to align their perception and memories to coincide with what they saw or heard. So we're moving into a world where either we're going to completely undermine public trust, where nobody believes anything that they see. And we're also going to have a situation where it's easier to raise doubts about real events, what's called the liar's dividend, where actual reality becomes plausibly deniable. And with that, let me hand it over to you, Professor Farid, so you can talk to us about detecting this stuff.
Thank you so much. And good to be here and talking about these important issues. So my bread and butter is developing computational and mathematical techniques to detect manipulated media. Back in the day, we used to call it Photoshop. And as you just heard from Professor Grossman, now we call them deepfakes or generative AI. Problem is the same. People are taking authentic content and manipulating or altering them, or now fully synthesizing them to alter reality. What I'm going to do is talk a little bit about, in the next 15 minutes, how we and others have been thinking about detecting these. And I think the first thing I need to emphasize is that perceptual assessment is limited. It's not non-existent, but it is limited. We fundamentally, despite the phenomenal power here in the human brain and human perception, these technologies, audio, image, and video, as you have just seen, are getting better and better and better. We run perceptual studies here to assess where people are in distinguishing real from fake, and they are fundamentally limited. And so while I'm not saying we shouldn't use our own senses to reason about content, we need help at the back end, and that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. There's two main categories of detecting manipulated content, what we call reactive and proactive. Reactive techniques are there at the point of recording, either on one of these devices, on a body cam, on a dash cam, on a CCTV cam, or in the generative AI where the content is being created or recorded, and then you put interventions. I'll talk about that later. And those are the proactive techniques, and the reactive techniques are ones where we just wait. We wait for a piece of content to go up online. We wait for a piece of content to be submitted into evidence, and then we analyze it to try to determine if we think it is real or fake. And I'm going to spend most of my time talking about those reactive techniques. That's a hard problem, and I'll end with some of the proactive techniques. Reactive techniques span a whole host of techniques. And let me just, preface this by saying I'm going to show some of the images coming out of Gaza. That's not to be political or to be outrageous. It's just that they are particularly timely, and these are the images that I'm seeing on a daily basis now. So some of these images will be of the war-torn area. And I just wanted to sort of apologize for that, but also I wanted to make the case that these are the types of analysis that we are doing on a day-to-day basis. When you look at images, your first thought is to look at the pixels, the actual underlying content. But before you do that, there's lots of information about the underlying file. So for example, in an image that is JPEG compressed, lots of decisions have to be made on how the JPEG file is created, from the quality, which are encoded in those numbers that you see there, to how all the information is packed into a file, and then some more encoding information. And all of these values that you see here, which I, of course, don't have time to talk about, embody the compression quality of the underlying JPEG. And this is true of audio with MP4 or video with, a video with MP3 or audio with MP3. And you have to make design decisions. And those design decisions are very different for a generative AI system versus a camera. And so just looking forget about the pixels, forget about the sound, simply how the file has been created tends to be fairly distinct for different types of recordings or AI generation. So we always start there. Eventually, you have to get to pixels. And so this is actually a snapshot of a Slack bot that I have where I can drop an image in, it will analyze it using very much the types of techniques that you just saw Professor Grossman talk about. Supervised learning, where you feed AI models, turning AI on itself, a bunch of fake images, a bunch of real images, or a bunch of fake videos, a bunch of real videos, and then it learns patterns and then can simply classify them. This is nice because it can learn from lots and lots of content. It can be highly reliable, but it's black box. I can't tell you why the AI does what it does. It's incredibly opaque and very hard to interpret, but it is one sort of tool that we have for analyzing images. Beyond that, so we've done files, we've done pixels, we can look at things like geometry. When you take photos in the physical world, there is an expected geometry. So for example, in this photo of a bunch of people, I think it was in Brazil, that were claiming to go to Israel to fight in the war, and this image went viral and people were claiming that it was fake. You see the tiled floor in the airport. All of those lines out in the floor are parallel. When you take an image of parallel lines in the world, they all converge to a vanishing point, which is what you see in that little dot right there. And so we can analyze things like the underlying geometry of vanishing points. And here's what we know, that from the early days of deepfakes to today, those systems have trouble getting this type of geometry correct. You won't notice it because of what I said earlier, perceptual assessment is limited, but we can do very simple geometric analyses to make sure that they are consistent with the real image. Doesn't prove it's real, but when you see inconsistencies, then you can say something. Shadow analysis is another example. So this is an example where you've got these little shadows, and each of these little yellow constraints here shows you the relationship between a shadow and an object. And the fact that there's a consistent point here that for all of the shadows suggests that this is a real image. Again, AI-generated images tend to get lighting good, but they're not physically correct because they don't know about the 3D geometry of the scene. And so we can analyze things like shadows as well. Let's talk about videos for a minute. Before DeSantis did drop out of the race, let me see if I can move my microphone so you can read this. There was a fake audio saying, "I've realized that I need to drop out of the race immediately. I was told I could be president by some powerful people, and I took some very bad advice." And this was an actual deep fake a few months ago of DeSantis dropping out. And this is what's called a lip sync deep fake, where they took an authentic video, and all they did was synthesize DeSantis's voice using technology that you saw Professor Grossman talk about, and then modified his mouth region to mouth the new words. Okay, so-called lip sync deep fake. And here's what we know about the shape of the mouth. When you say certain words like favor, victor, your mouth takes on a certain shape. When you say things like mother, brother, parent, try doing this at home right now. Say mother and try not closing your mouth. Other, you can't do it. Your mouth has to take on a certain, unless you're a ventriloquist, which good on you. So your mouth has to take on certain shapes. And what we find when we analyze these videos, oops, I lost my video of DeSantis. Let me see if I can bring it back. No, I lost it. Okay, so I'll just describe what it is. So when we analyze these videos of the lip sync deepfakes, we find that the mouth doesn't quite close the way we expect to. So by analyzing various moments in the time and correlating them to the sound that you're supposed to make, we can find inconsistencies between the mouth and the underlying sound. Face swap deepfakes are a different type of fake. So here, what they've done in this famous Tom Cruise TikTok video is they've taken an impersonator who sort of looks like Tom Cruise, and they've replaced his face, eyebrow to chin, cheek to cheek. So there's a slightly different type of deepfake video than Professor Grossman showed earlier, which is what's called a puppet master deepfake. So here, unlike the lip sync where everything is real except for this, here everything is fake except everything is the impersonator except for here, eyebrow to chin, cheek to cheek. So, for example, the ear associated with this deep fake is not actually Tom Cruise's. Turns out ears are actually fairly distinct. This is the ear from the impersonator, and this is Tom Cruise's ear, which you can just find online by searching for it. Notice that he has an attached earlobe and the impersonator doesn't. And also notice that the shape of inside the ear here is quite distinct between the Tom Cruise and the fake Tom Cruise. In fact, people have used the shapes of the ears as a biometric. Obviously, it changes over time a little bit as we age, but we can actually look at things like outside of the face to identify people. We also have customized models. So we have built models, for example, to specifically protect people like President Zelensky President Biden, former President Trump, against deepfakes, where we learned very specific characteristics of how they move their head, how they move their body, and what they sound like. And all three of these tend to be correlative when you speak, how you raise an eyebrow when you emphasize something, how you lean in a little bit, and so your voice gets louder because you're closer to the microphone. And so we can also build customized models for people who we know people are creating deepfakes of, presidential leaders and people like Elon Musk. Those were just a sample of reactive techniques, from files to pixels to images and to video. Lots and lots of techniques. A good forensic analyst has dozens and dozens of techniques where we can take our time, particularly when it comes to introduction of evidence into courts of law. But it's hard. It takes time. And experts are fairly few and far between. And so fundamentally, it's always a hard problem, particularly hard when you're trying to deal with disinformation campaigns online that are spreading very, very quickly. Proactive techniques take a different approach. The one you probably have seen are visible watermarks. So if you navigate over to Getty and you try to browse their images, they all have this type of watermark, which allows you to see the image, but not download and use it without their permission. And so visible watermarks are one way that when you are at the point of a generative AI system, you're an OpenAI or a DALL-E or a Midjourney or Adobe, you slap a watermark on there. The problem, of course, is it interferes with the image. And of course, I can take the watermark out. If I can put something in, I can take it out. In fact, there are many good AI systems for taking out watermarks. So there are also invisible watermarks, where you take a watermark like that Getty one and you inject it into the image, but you can't see it. It's invisible to you, but the software and the algorithms can actually read the watermarks. And we've been doing this for decades for copyright infringement. Again, it can be attacked. There are good attack vectors against this, but it is a good barrier to entry where if all images that are generated by an OpenAI have an invisible and maybe even a visible watermark, and maybe even multiple watermarks, then the adversary has to go to the trouble of removing those. And for some people, they'll do that, and for some people, they won't. Now, the benefit of the watermarks is that you've injected your signal into the content as you've released it into the wild. And that means the signal telling you whether it's real or not is embedded into it. But that also makes it vulnerable to attack. So there's a different approach where we can extract a fingerprint from the image that is generated. So you take an image and you extract a fingerprint, what's also called a hash, that is distinct to that image. Think of it like human DNA. And you store that server side. So every image that OpenAI generates, they hold on to a distinct fingerprint. When was it created? Who created it? And then when an image surfaces in a court of law on social media, we can go back to OpenAI and say, is this one of yours? We can go to Midjourney and say, is this one of yours? So the watermarking and the fingerprinting work together in concert. I'll say also that this type of technology can also be incorporated into this thing that I'm holding in my hand, my phone. We can bake into the hardware. The camera manufacturer can say, Hany Farid, on January 22nd at 9:34 a.m. has recorded this in Berkeley, California, and I can authenticate with a cryptographic signature that this is an image or a video of fill in the blanks, police misconduct, human rights violations, an accident, somebody running away from a crime scene. And then when that evidence is introduced into a court of law, your device itself has authenticated, which makes the reactive techniques much, much easier. I think you need both of these. And there are efforts along the way in the industry, namely the C2PA and the CAI, to incorporate this watermarking and fingerprinting into the technology. I'm at the 9:35 mark, so I'm going to stop now and turn it over to Judge Grimm, and I'm looking forward to everybody's questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Grossman and Professor Farid. I think that it's pretty obvious now what the impact of this relatively new technology can have on the fact-finding process that is part of the United States judicial system. So we start from the notion that our rules of evidence are what I would call jury-centric. They are written with the baseline expectation that the function of judges in a trial and the function of juries in a trial are different. The judges make decisions regarding legal matters, and that factual disputes are resolved by the fact finder. And the assumption is that fact finder in the civil and criminal justice system in the United States will be juries. That's why there's the constitutional protection in both civil and criminal cases for jury trials. Now, what we see here is that in this type of technology involving the increasing accuracy and reality that appears to be associated with deepfakes, and the challenges with detecting it that Professor Farid has just talked about, are such that we can expect that in disputes that have to be resolved in court, evidence on important matters may be affected by technology, the authenticity of which is going to be important. So the rules of evidence basically say that relevant evidence is presumed to be admissible unless some rule or constitutional or other source of law says it's not. And the definition of what's relevant is a relatively low bar, whether the evidence has any tendency, however slight, to prove something important in the outcome of a case. The key issue presented by the evidentiary framework in the United States associated with audio, visual, images, and audio-visual is going to be authenticity. And that is Evidence Rule 901 that says for non-testimonial evidence, the person offering that evidence has to show that it is what they say that it is. And in that regard, the key issue is it's not relevant if you can't show that it is an authentic portrayal of the person or event that you are trying to claim that it is. And so the entire notion of whether or not something is a deepfake or not will turn upon determining from this very challenging, based upon the changes and the improvements in the technology, dilemma of whether or not it's real or not real. And so I'm afraid that I'm hearing some sort of a warning here in the background in our school that I don't know that I can do anything about. It sounds like it's some sort of a, so can you hear that? Can you hear that in the background? All right, good. I'm going to keep going. So what you see is that the visual impact that you get from this type of evidence can be very dramatic and have a tremendous impact. You see someone that is at a critical time or doing something which is very important. They say something or they appear to be doing something that has a tremendous emotional impact on you. As Professor Farid has said, human perceptual assessment is not very good. It's limited. It looks like the person you think it is. It sounds like them. And it's oftentimes portrayed as some kind of emotional or very, very, very graphic content that can have a shock value. Now what happens is that you have some evidence that it is authentic because it looks like the person, it sounds like the person, it appears to be the person, it's related to events that we know that this person participates in. So those are all sufficient to show by a preponderance of evidence, more likely than not, that that's what's going on. And that's all you have to show. 51% likelihood that it is what I say that it is. Now, the party who is opposing that has to come in and try, by using those proactive and reactive methods, to say that it is or is not. And while there are some people who are subject matter experts like Professor Farid, they're few and far between, and it costs a significant amount of money and takes a significant amount of time to do that analysis. The other problem that we have, as Professor Grossman has said, is this software is available at very little cost or free and is getting much, much better. So where does that leave us from an evidentiary point of view? And this is where the challenge comes under our current system. The rules of evidence are not technology specific. And we have a particular rule of evidence that says when deciding if this video is genuine or not depends upon resolving disputed facts. One person says, this is the voice recording or the image of this person that I took with my camera. my cell phone, the other person denying that it's them. The decision as to which version is true is a disputed fact that the jury must make, not the judge. The judge's role is simply to decide whether a reasonable jury could accept it as authentic, and the judge does not have to decide that it is authentic, and then the jury hears both versions and decides. But the problem is, as Professor Grossman said, and as Professor Farid has shown us, you are in a situation now that the danger you are trying to prevent is the jury being impacted by evidence of questionable authenticity that changes the way in which they view the dispute they're called upon to resolve in ways that even if they know that it is fake, they can't dial out, they can't erase it. And so you have a potential evidentiary catch-22, that the decision as to whether it's authentic and therefore relevant is disputed, and the disputed facts must be decided by either a judge who is not a Professor Grossman or a Professor Farid, and a jury who may be dramatically impacted, even if they suspect or believe that it's probably a fake. Within that context, the only way in which the current rules of evidence would allow a court to be able to effectively deal with that is to determine whether or not, if there is a sufficient evidentiary basis for a reasonable fact finder to conclude that the challenged evidence is authentic, to then assess whether or not the impact of that, allowing it to come in, would be unfairly prejudicial to the party against whom it's being offered. And the decision will turn upon other things, not only whether there's evidence from a Professor Farid or Professor Grossman as to whether it's authentic, but whether this evidence is corroborated by undisputed evidence, whether it goes to the key issues in the case, and other aspects that may give the benefit of the doubt to allowing it in, because it will be less prejudicial because there is other evidence to corroborate it. But when you do not have that corroborative evidence, and when it goes to a key impact in the case, a key issue in the case, and the issue is a close issue, then judges and lawyers will have to assess whether or not the probative value, which in this type of evidence can be very great. This appears to be someone doing something that is the entire underlying dispute in the case. So it's going to be very probative. Therefore, the prejudice must be significantly greater than that. And that is a challenge to our legal system when the tools that we have to make these assessments require the involvement of individuals without the level of technical expertise. So how do you have to deal with this? It requires that judges manage their cases to identify those cases that will turn on this type of evidence and allow sufficient advanced production so the parties that want to challenge it can try to bring in experts to apply that reactive and proactive analysis to see whether or not it should be allowed in, and to try to schedule hearings before the trial to fully hear that evidence and then make the most informed decision that they can. But the bottom line is, this will become increasingly challenging as the evidence or the technology gets better and better. And you can see from what Professor Farid and Professor Grossman have said, since 2017, very short time ago, how much better this has gotten. And we know that technology advances at a breakneck speed. So I'm going to stop with that sort of overview of the system, because we want to have some time for comment from Professor Grossman, Professor Farid, and hopefully for your questions as well.
Thank you, Judge Grimm. Thank you, Professor Farid. So I'll turn to the questions, and we can address them. And if there are any more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A. So the first comment slash question is that my use of the word scary vastly underestimates or understates the depth of public policy concern, and the legal system may be the less important sector. Is there any discussion about regulation of fakery? First Amendment issues, I'm sure, but lying is not always or often protected. Well, first, Judge Grimm and I can tell you that we went to visit the Federal Advisory Committee on evidence rules in October. And understandably, they're a conservative institution. They don't like to change rules for new technologies. They were certainly open to listening to what we had to say, and perhaps were interested in doing some kind of symposium to get more information. But even if they decided today that they were going to change the rules, we wouldn't be looking at a change until 2028. And, I think they want more time to think about how to do this. I know Judge Grimm and I submitted a proposal, but it's very difficult to generate a rule that addresses two different situations. One is when Hany and I agree it's AI, and then the question is it valid? Is it reliable? Was it trained properly? Was it tested, and so on and so forth? And when Hany and I don't agree, where I'm saying it's real and Hany is saying no, it's fake. And we were trying to make the general rule is the smallest possible change you can possibly make in a rule, and we struggled with that. I don't know, Judge Grimm, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that the question's a great question. I think that you can see in the past decade that there has been a real call for regulation, whether it is regulation from federal agencies or state agencies, statute from governments, local governments, state governments, and federal governments, to address a lot of high-tech issues, privacy, the sufficiency by which these technologies have to be shown to be valid and reliable in order to be used, the concerns about bias built into them. And while the concern is widespread and it crosses all sides of the political spectrum, it hasn't produced any real significant legislative or regulatory reforms or requirements. They're being looked at. They're doing more, I think, in the European area than they are in the United States. But that process has been slow, even when there is a common belief that there should be efforts to do something about it. And with evidence, the challenge that we have in the court system is that these devices, these artificial intelligence generated software, generative AI applications are being used in every aspect of our society. And so the disputes that the courts will be called upon to resolve are necessarily going to end up in court. And so the courts are not going to have the ability to deal with it. Professor Farid's point, I think, and we can get his thoughts on this in just a second, is the one that is really significant because, as the questioner pointed out, the legal system addresses a problem long after that problem occurred. We can expect in the 2024 to see many, many examples of individuals who employ deepfake technology to try to influence voters, try to influence the public. These can be efforts that generate within the United States. They can be efforts that generate outside in an effort to try to affect our system. And the problem is that when you see it on social media or it is in a news feed, then all of a sudden no one's going to stop and have a Professor Grossman and a Professor Farid come in and analyze at that point whether it's a fake or whether it's legitimate, and opinions are going to change. When you get into a courtroom, at least it's after the fact, and you can begin to apply these reactive and proactive devices. The biggest challenge about most evidentiary disputes is you agree what you're arguing over. If it's a hearsay statement, you agree that it's either hearsay or it's not hearsay. It's offered for its truth, it's not offered for its truth. But what's fundamentally different here is that you don't agree about what this evidence is. One side says it's authentic, one side says it's fake. And it's very hard to draft a rule of evidence or procedure that focuses on an area of a dispute where there's just not an agreement as to what you're even arguing over. And that is very, very, very challenging. And I think that that is why, and I'll be quiet and let Professor Farid jump in. I think what he's talking about those proactive measures of embedding, if you have more cell phone manufacturers, more outfits like generative AI and Meta and Google and all these companies that are making software applications that put into that evidence at the very beginning those watermarks, those DNA fingerprints to show what is or is not authentic, then over time, then as for many of these things, we will be able to more readily determine if it's real or not real, to be able perhaps in the course of a news cycle to address something that is a fake. The problem is that the dark web will always offer for sale technology that is good and that can be purchased for doing something that is illegal or improper. And many of the images that you're going to see will not be prepared from those sources that have those proactive protections built in. It will take time for that to occur. Professor Farid, any thoughts on this area?
I do, but we have so many questions and we're short on time, so maybe we can just try to get through as many. And I'm going to type answers to some of the ones that are specific to me as well, Judge.
And I'll just add that there have been federal legislation proposed. We could spend a lot of time talking about whether Congress is functional enough to do anything about it. But my guess is where we're going to see movement is probably at the state level. I expect California and some other states are eventually going to jump onto this issue quicker than the federal government. So we did get a question on the deepfake defense and the use of the deepfake defense to where a party challenges somebody who's seeking to enter evidence, and sort of everybody knows it's authentic video, but at the same time, they not only say it's inauthentic, but they refuse to testify in a deposition about whether the video actually captures the event as it occurred. So the example that's given is the Tesla case and Elon Musk. Well, as you saw there, the court wasn't having it. The court hasn't had it patience for the people in the January 6th who have said during their trials, that wasn't me. But how do you think, Judge Grimm, courts are going to deal with this issue moving forward?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is that just a conclusory statement that this is a fake. If you have evidence being offered, there's a continuum of objections that can occur. One objection might be, objection, this is a deep fake. Everybody knows that deep fakes are out there. You can't trust anything you see. That is a completely conclusory objection. There's no factual basis to support a finding based upon that challenge that this is actually a deep fake. No one's denied that it's them. No one's offered an expert to say that it's not authentic. They haven't testified to do that. The judges are not going to have much tolerance for that. That's what I refer to as the lions and tigers and bears, oh my, objection. It is completely hypothetical. It is completely conclusory. And the next step on the continuum is one that I worry more about, and that's cross-examination. So you get someone who's put a video up. Let's say it's a police officer who has viewed a surveillance video in a case involving a crime. And the cross-examination says, officer, Are you a computer expert? No, I'm not. Are you familiar with the concept of a deepfake? Yes, I am. Tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what a deepfake is. Well, it's something that appears to be real, but it's not. They can be pretty realistic. Would you agree? Yeah. Did you analyze this video to determine whether it was a deepfake or not? Well, no, I don't have that expertise. Well, if you don't have it, did you send it out to someone who could? And that's the kind of cross-examination that gets a little bit more iffy, because there's not a factual basis for proffering that it's fake, because there's no factual basis to support that. But the questioning itself can begin to lead doubt. And then you're going to see in closing argument, ladies and gentlemen, you know how pervasive deepfakes are. You can't even turn the news on without seeing those. This has to be found beyond a reasonable doubt. There's got to be some doubt. I worry about that. And then the next step is you actually offer evidence. And that's why judges need to try to get the parties to identify these issues well before trial and have that hearing where you can see the evidence on both sides and make pre-trial definitive rulings, so that the dispute that if there's evidence to suggest that it may be fake, that can be dealt with, but the conclusory allegations that might be intended to prejudice the juries are prohibited.
I'll just add one thing to this, if I may. This is not new. We used to call this, when it came to prosecuting child sexual abuse imagery, there was what was called the virtual defense, where people say, oh, that's not a real child. And if the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children didn't have the image of that child in the known victims database, now we are exactly having the conversation that Judge Grimm just described. So this is that, but now on steroids, because of course the ability to create the fake content is so much more prevalent and so much more on people's mindset. So I think we have some experience with this, but I think the problem is going to get worse.
So let me ask Professor Farid the last question, since we're running out of time. A number of the questions here, the people have asked essentially the same question, is like, when is CAI and C2PA, when is it going to be here? When is it going to be on every camera and video player?
So there's some good news and bad news here. The good news here is there's two parts to this. When are you going to get that watermarking and fingerprinting, the proactive, on the generative AI side? And the answer is today. So Adobe has it in their system. They have an agreement with OpenAI, which just announced last week that they're going to do it. And now it's a question of getting the Midjourneys and the Stable Diffusions and all the others. Understand, however, that there will be bad actors in this space. There is open source code that we can't control. But when you get the big players doing it, the CAI is already off the ground and is already being incorporated into an existing generative AI systems. On this side, the C2PA, getting this thing into the phones, years away. There are conversations with the manufacturers, Apple and Google, of course, but the life cycle of a piece of hardware on a mobile device is measured in years, not months. So that's going to take a little bit longer. But the good news is that the C2PA spec is out. This is an open source Linux foundation. Everything is completely transparent. And for full disclosure, I work with both of those organizations. The spec is out. The technology is developed. We know what to do. There's a couple of technical questions, by the way, that people asked me that I responded by typing. So you can look at those responses in the Q&A. So I would say for the AI side, months, and for the real side, years. I would like, however, to point that the Judge Grimm was just making is, I think body cams, dash cams, CCTVs, all of that should be C2PA compliant. There's no question. We should not be arguing about body cams anymore, which we still are arguing about. So I don't think this is a technological barrier. I think this is an implementation barrier.
So I'll wrap up by saying Judge Grimm and I have written a number of papers on this topic. I can find out from Joey whether we can put some links. Otherwise, feel free to email me. We have a paper in Northwestern Journal of Tech and Intellectual Property on AI as evidence. We have in the Duke Law and Tech Review, we have the GPT judge, and we have some pieces in Judicature, and we are coming out very shortly with an even more detailed piece in the Chicago Law Forum that takes it even a step further in terms of some details. So if you want any of those, feel free to reach out to me. And Joey, let me turn it over to you to close this out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much to all of our expert panelists today, Hany Farid, Judge Grimm, and Maura Grossman. This was an enthralling conversation, and I learned a lot, and I happen to know a lot in this space, and I learned even more, so I'm grateful to this. Today's event will be available on the AI Task Force website next week on our homepage, so you'll be able to watch this event on demand. And any additional resources from this event we'll make available on the task force website as well. Today's event was put on by the AI Task Force, the ABA Presidential Task Force on Artificial Intelligence and the Law, and was specifically organized by our working groups on AI and the courts. So thank you for all of the planning into this event. Today's event, the comments of our speakers today do not necessarily reflect those of the ABA and have not been approved by the House of Delegates or the Board of Governors. We look forward to seeing you at our next event on March 13th, and we will see you then. Thank you.